The strange thing about destiny, Marcus Hale would later say, is that it never knocks on the front door. It crashes through the sky when you're least prepared. The transport shuttle wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the royal world of Vera that day. Marcus knew that much even before the alarms began their sharp metallic chorus. Red indicators pulsed across the cockpit panels, reflecting off the windshield like scattered embers. Outside, the planet stretched beneath him, vast and blue-green, wrapped in silver cloud bands that shimmered in the morning sunlight. Marcus tightened his grip on the control stick. "Easy, easy," he muttered under his breath. The ship shuddered again, a long vibrating groan running through the hull like a tired animal. Marcus had flown worse equipment during his years in the Marines, but never above an alien royal capital that glowed like a jewel beneath him. The navigation system flickered and went dark for a moment before blinking back to life. Whatever interference filled the upper atmosphere here wasn't friendly to human electronics. The shuttle dipped sharply, and Marcus adjusted the thrusters with careful, steady movements. He wasn't panicking. Marines didn't panic. But he was definitely reconsidering every life choice that had brought him into a small metal box plummeting toward a palace city built by a civilization thousands of years older than Earth. The capital of Vera came into view through the clouds like something out of a painting. Towering white spires curved toward the sky, their surfaces reflecting sunlight in smooth arcs of silver and pale blue. Bridges of crystal connected platforms that floated gracefully in the air, supported by technology Marcus couldn't even begin to guess at. It was beautiful in a way that almost made him forget the warning lights still blinking across his console. Almost. The shuttle's engines coughed once more, then stabilized just enough for him to guide the craft toward a wide green valley just outside the city's outer structures. The landing wasn't elegant. The shuttle touched down hard across a field of violet grass that bent beneath the weight of the craft before springing back upright. The engines powered down with a tired hum. Silence settled over the valley. Marcus exhaled slowly and leaned back in the pilot's seat. Well, he said to no one in particular, that could have gone worse. He stepped out of the shuttle a minute later. Boots sinking slightly into the soft alien soil. The air smelled different here, cleaner somehow, carrying the faint scent of something floral he couldn't identify. A gentle breeze moved across the valley, whispering through the tall grass. And then Marcus heard something else. Footsteps. Quick ones. Not mechanical. Not heavy. Someone was running. Marcus turned instinctively toward the sound just as a figure burst from the edge of the nearby forest line. She moved fast, almost gliding across the grass, her long silver hair catching the sunlight like threads of metal. Her skin held a deep blue tone that shimmered softly in the daylight, and her posture carried a kind of quiet authority even while she was clearly in a hurry. She slowed when she saw Marcus standing beside the damaged shuttle. For a moment, the two of them simply stared at each other across the field. Marcus raised one eyebrow. "You know," he said calmly, brushing a bit of dust from his jacket, "I'm starting to get the feeling I landed somewhere important." The woman studied him with bright, searching eyes. Then she spoke in careful English, her voice steady but urgent. "Human, if you value your life, you should leave this place immediately." Marcus glanced at the silent shuttle behind him, then back at her. He gave a small shrug. "Yeah," he said, "that might be a problem." Marcus Hale had learned a long time ago that when someone opened a conversation with the words "if you value your life you should leave," it usually meant two things were already happening at the same time: trouble was coming and leaving was no longer an option. He looked past the blue-skinned woman toward the distant towers of the alien capital. The white structures rose thousands of feet into the sky, their curved surfaces reflecting the late morning sunlight like polished mirrors. Floating bridges shimmered between platforms high above the ground, and for a moment the place looked less like a city and more like a crown resting on the surface of the planet. Marcus folded his arms and gave the woman a calm look, the kind that had helped him survive years of unpredictable situations. "All right," he said slowly, "let me guess, something followed you out here and I just landed in the middle of it." The woman did not answer immediately. Her silver hair moved gently. In the wind, and Marcus noticed that despite the urgency in her warning, her posture remained perfectly straight, almost regal, as if even running across a field could not erase the habit of standing like royalty. Her eyes studied him carefully, measuring something beyond the surface. "You do not understand where you are," she finally said. "This valley belongs to the royal district of Vera. No unauthorized vessels are permitted here." Marcus glanced back at the shuttle, its engine panel still cooling in the sunlight, thin trails of vapor rising from the metal hull. "Lady," he replied, "if I had planned this landing, I promise you it would have been somewhere with less gravity and a working fuel station." For the briefest moment the woman looked confused, as if humor was a language she rarely encountered. Then a distant humming sound drifted across the valley. Marcus recognized it immediately. Aircraft, but not human aircraft. These moved silently through the air like gliding shadows. The woman heard them too. Her expression changed instantly, the calm authority in her eyes tightening into something more urgent. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Listen to me, human. Those ships are searching this sector. If they find you here, they will assume you are involved." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Involved in what exactly?" The woman hesitated for half a second, as if the answer carried weight she had not expected to explain to a stranger. "In the survival of the royal line." Marcus blinked once. "That sounds important." The humming grew louder now, faint shapes appearing high above the clouds, smooth metallic craft moving in wide circles across the sky. Marcus could feel the vibration through the ground beneath his boots. Whoever controlled those ships clearly had resources far beyond anything he had ever dealt with on Earth. He looked back at the woman, studying her more carefully now, the elegant silver clothing, the quiet strength in her stance, the unmistakable confidence of someone used to command. "All right," Marcus said thoughtfully, "I am going to go out on a limb here and guess you are not just another citizen enjoying a morning jog." She held his gaze for a long second before answering, "My name is Lyra Veyrath." Marcus waited, but she did not continue. Then the realization settled in slowly, like the final piece of a puzzle. Marcus exhaled softly and rubbed the back of his neck. "Lyra Veyrath," he repeated. "That sounds like the kind of name people put on statues." Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes shifted almost reluctantly. "It is the name of the heir to the Veyran throne." Marcus stared at her for a moment, then looked up at the approaching ships again, then back at the woman standing in front of him. The wind moved gently through the violet grass around them, and somewhere in the distance the great alien city shimmered beneath the sunlight. Marcus sighed quietly. "You know," he said, "I had a feeling this day was about to get complicated." Marcus Hale stared at Lyra Veyrath for several seconds while the distant aircraft continued circling the sky above the valley, the soft humming sound drifting through the air like a warning carried by the wind. He had met important people before, generals, politicians, even a few corporate executives back on Earth, but none of them had ever introduced themselves while standing in a field on an alien world with half a fleet apparently searching the horizon. Marcus finally exhaled slowly and looked back toward the sky. "All right," he said calmly, "let me make sure I understand this situation correctly." He pointed upward toward the approaching craft. "Those ships are looking for you." Lyra did not answer immediately, but the silence was answer enough. Marcus nodded once. "And if they find you standing here with me, they will probably assume I helped you escape something important." Lyra crossed her arms lightly across her silver-lined uniform, the gesture calm but deliberate. "That is a reasonable assumption." Marcus let out a quiet laugh, the kind people make when a problem grows too large to solve in the usual ways. "Well, that explains why today feels like the universe is testing my patience." The aircraft above shifted formation, their smooth silhouettes gliding through the clouds in wide arcs. Marcus could now see the faint reflection of sunlight along their hulls, sleek machines far more advanced than the small transport shuttle sitting behind him. He glanced over his shoulder at the damaged craft. Its navigation system was barely functional, and the fuel reserve indicator had already dropped dangerously low. Leaving was no longer a realistic option, even if he wanted to. Lyra followed his gaze toward the shuttle. "Your vessel cannot travel far in its current condition." Marcus nodded once. "You noticed that too?" The wind moved across the tall violet grass again, bending the field like a slow wave beneath the bright alien sky. For a moment neither of them spoke, then Lyra stepped slightly closer, her voice lowering just enough to keep the conversation private. "Human Marcus Hale." Marcus raised one eyebrow, slightly surprised to hear his name spoken so clearly. "You picked that up fast." Lyra continued as if she had not heard the comment. "Those ships belong to members of the Royal Council who believe my removal from the line of succession would bring stability to the Empire." Marcus considered that sentence carefully. "That sounds like a polite way of saying they want you out of the picture." Lyra met his eyes calmly. Your interpretation is accurate. Marcus rubbed his jaw thoughtfully, then glanced back toward the distant city again, the tall towers still shining in the sunlight like enormous sculptures rising miles into the air. So let me get this straight, he said slowly. I crash land on a royal planet, I meet the heir to the throne running through a field, and now half the government is flying search patterns overhead hoping to find her before someone else does. Lyra watched him with quiet curiosity, as if measuring how his mind worked. That summary is surprisingly precise. Marcus let out a slow breath, then looked back at her with a small crooked smile. Princess, I do not mean to sound negative, but I think your problem just became my problem. Lyra studied his expression carefully before speaking again. Not yet. Marcus folded his arms. I have a feeling that word yet is doing a lot of work in that sentence. For a moment the wind was the only sound between them, then Lyra turned slightly toward the distant city, her silver hair shifting across her shoulder in the sunlight. There is an ancient law within the Varen Empire, she said quietly, a law that protects the heir during times of political instability. Marcus tilted his head slightly. I am guessing that law involves something complicated. Lyra looked back at him, and for the first time there was a hint of hesitation in her voice. It requires the princess to declare a bonded protector for a period of 1 year. Marcus waited for the rest of the sentence. But when it did not come, he frowned slightly. That does not sound so bad. Lyra held his gaze and finished the thought. The protector must also be publicly recognized as the princess's official mate. Marcus blinked once, then slowly looked around the empty valley, the broken shuttle, the towering alien city, the search ships gliding silently across the sky, and finally back to the calm blue-skinned princess standing directly in front of him. He sighed quietly and shook his head. You know, he said, something tells me the universe already filled out the application form for that job. Marcus Hale remained silent for several seconds after Lyra finished speaking, the wind moving gently across the valley while the distant search craft continued their slow circles across the sky. His mind worked through the situation piece by piece, the way it always had during difficult missions. First, the facts: his shuttle was damaged, the planet belonged to a powerful empire, and the person standing in front of him was not just a traveler or a diplomat, she was the heir to the throne of an entire civilization. Second, the complication: an ancient law required her to publicly declare a bonded protector, and that protector also had to stand beside her as her official mate for 1 year. Marcus finally rubbed his forehead slowly and let out a long breath. All right, he said quietly, I have to admit that is not a sentence I expected to hear when I woke up this morning. Lyra watched him carefully, her posture straight, her expression calm, but there was a subtle tension in her shoulders, as if she already knew the human standing in front of her might become the only unpredictable factor in a carefully controlled political storm. Marcus looked back toward the silent shuttle behind him, then at the wide valley stretching toward the shining towers of the alien capital. Let me ask the obvious question, he said. Why me? Lyra answered without hesitation, because the law requires a protector who is not part of the royal bloodlines or the council families. Marcus nodded slowly. So the law wants someone neutral. Lyra gave a slight nod. Exactly. Marcus gestured around the empty valley, and apparently I just happened to fall out of the sky at the perfect moment. For the first time Lyra allowed the faintest hint of a smile to touch the corner of her mouth. Your arrival was unexpected, but it satisfies the legal requirement perfectly. Marcus tilted his head and looked up at the sky again. The search ships were still moving slowly across the clouds, their smooth shapes gliding with quiet precision like watchful hawks. He lowered his gaze back to the princess. Let me guess something else. Those ships up there belong to the people who would prefer that law never gets activated. Lyra nodded once. Correct. If the law is declared publicly, the council cannot remove me without breaking one of the oldest traditions in the empire. Marcus gave a low whistle. So if you officially choose a protector, they are stuck playing by the rules. Lyra met his eyes again. Yes. Marcus folded his arms, thinking carefully about what that would mean. A full year on an alien world, living beside a royal family, standing in front of an empire that already seemed divided about its future. It sounded less like a job and more like stepping into the center of a storm. He glanced again at the quiet field around them, the purple grass bending gently in the breeze, the towering city glowing in the distance, and the silent shuttle that had brought him here by accident. Sometimes life did not ask permission before changing direction. Marcus finally looked back at Lyra with a thoughtful expression. So if I understand this correctly, you need someone who is not connected to your government, someone who can stand beside you in public, and someone who is willing to stay on this planet for a full year. Lyra nodded slowly. That is the requirement. Marcus took a deep breath and looked at the sky once more, then back at the calm blue-skinned princess waiting for his answer. "Princess," he said carefully, "I have spent most of my life solving problems that did not belong to me, but this one might be the strangest assignment I have ever heard." Lyra remained still, watching him as if the next words would determine the direction of the entire empire. Marcus gave a small tired smile and shrugged slightly. "But if your law says you need a protector for a year, then I guess the universe just volunteered one." Marcus Hale noticed the change in Lyra Veyrath almost immediately after his words settled into the quiet valley. It was not dramatic. She did not gasp or step back, and there was no sudden celebration, but something behind her calm royal composure shifted slightly, like a weight that had been resting on her shoulders finally easing, even if only a little. The distant aircraft still moved across the sky above them, their smooth shapes drifting through the clouds while beams of pale sunlight reflected off their metallic hulls. Marcus followed her gaze for a moment before speaking again. "So what happens next, Princess? Because I am guessing the law you mentioned does not become official until somebody announces it to a lot of important people." Lyra nodded slowly. "Correct, the declaration must be made before the council and witnessed by the imperial court." Marcus gave a small thoughtful hum, "Which means we probably need to reach that very large glowing city before those ships realize you are standing in a field with a human pilot who just agreed to become your protector." Lyra turned slightly toward the distant towers, the capital of Vera still shining like polished glass against the horizon, the tallest spires reaching thousands of feet into the sky while floating bridges connected massive platforms that seemed to hang effortlessly in the air. "Yes," she said quietly, "once the declaration is made, the law will protect us both." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Both of us?" Lyra met his eyes again. "The protector receives the same legal immunity as the royal heir during the one-year bond." Marcus chuckled softly. "That sounds useful considering the number of ships currently looking for you." A faint sound drifted across the valley again, the search craft adjusting their pattern slightly closer now, the humming vibration echoing faintly through the ground. Marcus glanced toward the shuttle behind him, knowing it would not take those pilots long to notice the unusual landing site in the open field. "All right," he said calmly, "then we should probably get moving before someone decides to come investigate the tourist attraction." Lyra studied him for a moment longer, as if she was still measuring the decision he had made. Humans were not part of Varen politics, and yet here one stood ready to step into the center of it with surprising ease. "Marcus Hale," she said quietly, "you understand what this agreement means?" Marcus shrugged lightly. "It means I spend 1 year pretending to be the princess's official partner while making sure nobody breaks the rules of your ancient law." Lyra nodded once, but her voice softened slightly. "It also means that for 1 year your life will be tied to mine in the eyes of the Empire." Marcus looked at her for a second, then smiled in a relaxed, almost amused way. "Princess, I used to serve on a marine rescue unit back on Earth. Trust me when I say I have had stranger partnerships." Lyra seemed to consider that statement carefully before turning toward the path leading through the violet grass toward the distant city. The breeze moved around them, carrying the faint scent of alien flowers, while the massive capital waited beyond the horizon, a place Marcus had never expected to see. "Then we must reach the palace before the council completes its search," Lyra said. "Once the declaration is spoken, they cannot challenge the law without challenging the empire itself." Marcus glanced at the sky once more, then back at the calm, determined princess walking beside him. He placed his hands in the pockets of his flight jacket and began moving with her across the valley toward the shining towers of Vera, and after a few quiet steps he spoke again with a slight grin in his voice. "You know, princess, most people spend years planning how they will meet royalty. I just crash-landed into the job." Lyra allowed the smallest hint of amusement to appear in her expression as the two of them continued toward the city that would soon witness the most unexpected royal declaration in generations. Marcus Hale had walked through many cities in his life, but none of them had ever looked like Vera. The closer he and Lyra moved toward the capital, the more the scale of the place revealed itself. The towers that once looked distant and delicate from the valley now rose like enormous sculptures of white stone and silver metal, some reaching nearly a mile into the sky, curved surfaces reflecting the afternoon sunlight in long glowing lines that stretched across the floating bridges connecting one structure to another. Marcus kept his pace steady beside the princess as they followed a narrow path through the violet grass toward a smooth roadway that seemed to appear from the ground itself, as if the planet had decided exactly where travelers should walk. "I have to admit something," Marcus said while studying the massive architecture ahead. "Earth has some impressive cities, but none of them look like they were designed by people who could casually bend gravity." Lyra glanced toward him briefly, her silver hair shifting slightly in the warm breeze. The floating districts were built nearly 4,000 years ago during the expansion era of the Empire. Marcus raised his eyebrows. 4,000 years, that is older than most countries on my planet. Lyra nodded calmly. Varen history is long and often complicated. Marcus chuckled quietly. That seems to be a universal trait among civilizations. The road beneath their feet shimmered faintly as they stepped onto it, the surface smooth and cool like polished glass but strong enough to support the gentle flow of small hovering vehicles passing above them along invisible lanes. Marcus watched several of them glide silently overhead, sleek oval-shaped transports carrying citizens across the city without engines or wings. All right, he said thoughtfully. I officially confirm that my navigation system has never visited a place like this before. Lyra allowed a faint hint of amusement to return to her expression as they continued walking toward the first outer structures of the capital. The lower districts surrounded the towering palace complex with wide circular plazas, gardens of strange glowing plants and elegant buildings that curved upward in shapes that felt almost organic. Marcus noticed something else as well. The people, many of them moved through the plazas wearing clothing similar to Lyra's, long flowing fabrics with subtle metallic patterns and skin tones that ranged from deep blue to soft violet and pale silver. Several citizens glanced curiously at the human walking beside their princess, but none approached. Lyra slowed slightly as they entered a broad open courtyard surrounded by tall columns that reflected the sunlight in bright arcs. From this point forward we are inside the royal district, she said quietly. The palace council will already be aware that I have returned. Marcus looked around the enormous courtyard, which stretched nearly 200 yards across, its center dominated by a circular platform made of crystal-like stone with delicate symbols etched across its surface. Let me guess, that platform is where you make the official declaration. Lyra nodded once. Yes, the court will assemble there to witness the bond. Marcus studied the platform carefully, then glanced back at the open sky, where the distant search craft still moved far beyond the city towers. So once we step onto that stage and you say the words, the law becomes active. Lyra turned toward him fully now, her calm royal composure returning as if she had stepped back into the role she had been trained for since childhood. Once the declaration is spoken, the Empire will recognize you as my bonded protector and my mate for the duration of 1 year. Marcus placed his hands on his hips and exhaled slowly while studying the massive palace rising beyond the courtyard, doors several hundred feet tall slowly opening as if the city itself had been waiting for them to arrive. Well, princess, he said quietly with a small smile, I suppose we should go introduce the Empire to its newest accidental royal partner. Marcus Hale stepped beside Lyra Varath as the enormous palace doors continued to open with slow deliberate grace, revealing a hall so vast that for a moment he wondered if the architects of this civilization had ever believed in the concept of small spaces. The ceiling, arched nearly 300 feet above them, formed from curved panels of crystal that allowed soft daylight to filter into the chamber like a quiet glow from the sky itself. Tall columns lined the edges of the hall, each carved with delicate patterns that shimmered faintly as if tiny streams of light moved beneath their surfaces. Marcus took a slow breath while his boots echoed lightly across the polished floor beside the princess. I have to admit something, he said quietly while studying the enormous chamber. When you said royal court, I imagined something slightly smaller than this. Lyra walked with calm, steady steps, her posture perfectly straight as if she had walked this path thousands of times before. The Varen court is meant to remind visitors of the age and stability of the Empire, she replied softly. Every part of the palace was designed to inspire respect. Marcus gave a small amused nod. Mission accomplished. As they moved deeper into the hall, figures began appearing along the curved balconies that overlooked the chamber. Dozens of individuals dressed in elaborate garments stepped forward to observe the unexpected arrival. Their skin tones carried the familiar shades of blue, violet and silver Marcus had seen in the city, but their clothing marked them as members of the Imperial Council and noble families. Whispers moved through the air like a quiet current as the observers noticed the human walking beside the heir to the throne. Marcus kept his pace calm even though he could feel hundreds of curious eyes following every step. Lyra slowed as they reached the circular platform. Marcus had noticed from the courtyard the crystal surface shimmered beneath their feet, the engraved symbols glowing faintly as if the platform itself recognized the presence of the royal heir. Marcus glanced down briefly. Let me guess, this is where the big speech happens. Lyra nodded once, her voice returning to the composed tone of someone addressing an empire rather than a single companion. Yes, once the council witnesses the declaration, the ancient law will be activated. Marcus looked up as more members of the court gathered along the balconies above until the chamber felt filled with quiet attention. A tall figure wearing deep silver robes stepped forward near the far side of the platform, clearly a senior member of the council. His voice carried across the hall with calm authority. "Princess Lyra Veyrath, the council has searched for you across the royal district. We were beginning to believe you had left the capital." Lyra stepped forward onto the center of the platform, her expression serene and unshaken. "I have returned to fulfill a duty older than this council." Marcus stayed just beside her, arms relaxed but his attention quietly alert. The council members' gaze shifted toward him for a moment, curiosity mixed with disbelief. "And who is this human who walks beside the heir to the throne?" Lyra did not hesitate. "This is Marcus Hale of Earth." A ripple of murmurs moved through the watching court. Marcus resisted the urge to wave at the crowd and instead simply nodded politely. Lyra raised her voice slightly so that every balcony could hear her words clearly. "According to the ancient law of Veyran succession, during times of uncertainty the royal heir may declare a bonded protector who will stand beside them for 1 full year, ensuring the stability of the empire." The chamber grew completely silent. Marcus could almost feel the moment stretching across the hall as the council realized what she was about to say. Lyra turned slightly toward him and for a brief moment their eyes met before she continued with steady certainty. "I now declare Marcus Hale as my chosen protector and my bonded mate under the authority of the ancient law." For a long second the hall remained silent, the weight of tradition settling over every observer before the glowing symbols beneath the platform brightened gently, confirming the declaration. Marcus looked down at the light, then back toward the stunned faces along the balconies and gave a quiet, thoughtful nod. "Well," he said under his breath, "that makes it official." The silence that followed Lyra Veyrath's declaration did not feel empty, it felt heavy, like the moment after thunder when the sky waits to decide whether another storm will arrive. The glowing symbols beneath the crystal platform slowly dimmed after confirming the ancient law, and the hundreds of figures watching from the balconies remained frozen in quiet disbelief. Marcus Hale shifted his weight slightly beside the princess and looked up at the assembled court. The expression staring down at him ranged from curiosity to confusion and in a few cases clear frustration. He gave a small polite nod to no one in particular, as if he had just been introduced at a formal dinner instead of being declared the bonded partner of an alien royal heir. A tall council member in deep silver robes stepped forward again, his voice calm but noticeably sharper than before. "Princess Lyra, the council acknowledges the activation of the ancient law. However, the presence of a human as your declared protector raises many questions." Lyra did not turn to face him. She remained standing at the center of the platform, her posture perfectly composed. "The law does not restrict the origin of the protector, only that they are outside the bloodlines of the empire and capable of standing beside the heir without political influence." A low murmur spread through the observers along the balconies. Marcus folded his arms loosely across his chest and leaned slightly toward Lyra, speaking quietly so only she could hear him. "I have a feeling I just became the most controversial visitor your planet has seen in a while." Lyra allowed the faintest hint of a smile to appear before returning her attention to the council. "Marcus Hale arrived without alliance to any house or faction. He meets the requirement exactly as written." The council member studied Marcus carefully, his gaze lingering for a moment as if trying to understand how a human pilot had suddenly stepped into a role written thousands of years before Earth had even developed modern flight. "Human Marcus Hale, do you understand the responsibility you have accepted?" Marcus looked up toward the balcony and answered with calm honesty, "I understand that for 1 year I stand beside the princess and make sure the rules of your law stay respected. That seems clear enough." A few members of the court exchanged quiet whispers, clearly uncertain how to respond to the direct simplicity of the answer. Lyra stepped slightly closer to Marcus, now addressing the entire chamber with steady authority. "From this moment forward the protector's life is tied to mine. In the eyes of the empire, any challenge to him is considered a challenge to the law itself." The effect of those words moved through the hall like a ripple across still water. The council members understood what it meant. The ancient law had locked the situation into place. Marcus noticed something change in the atmosphere. Almost immediately the tension did not disappear, but it shifted from uncertainty to reluctant acceptance. Tradition in a civilization this old carried enormous weight even for those who disliked the outcome. Marcus leaned slightly closer to Lyra again, his voice quiet but thoughtful. "So what happens now, princess? Do we start planning how to survive a year of royal politics?" Lyra looked toward the high windows where sunlight streamed across the palace floor, illuminating the vast chamber with a soft golden glow. "Now the empire adjusts to something it did not expect." Marcus followed her gaze across the enormous hall, the ancient architecture, the silent observers, and the glowing symbols still faintly visible beneath the platform. One accidental landing, one decision in a quiet valley, and now the entire balance of a galactic empire had quietly shifted. He let out a slow breath and gave a small thoughtful smile. You know, Lyra, back on Earth people say life can change in a single day. I do not think they had anything like this in mind. For several minutes after the declaration, the great hall of the Veyron Palace remained filled with a quiet that felt almost ceremonial. The council members slowly returned to their seats along the curved balconies, their conversations hushed and careful, as if everyone understood that the Empire had just crossed a line written thousands of years earlier. Marcus Hale stood beside Lyra Veyrath on the glowing platform, watching the enormous chamber adjust to a reality no one had expected. Only hours earlier he had been guiding a damaged shuttle through unfamiliar clouds. Now he was standing in the center of a royal court, recognized by ancient law as the bonded protector of an alien princess. He let out a slow breath and studied the vast architecture around him. The curved crystal ceiling far above reflected the fading afternoon sunlight, while long beams of golden light stretched across the polished floor. Lyra remained beside him, her posture steady, but Marcus noticed the faint shift in her shoulders. The tension she had carried since the valley seemed lighter now, as if the declaration had finally given her room to breathe. He leaned slightly closer and spoke in a quiet voice meant only for her. So that is it, the law is active and the council cannot challenge it. Lyra nodded slowly, her silver hair catching the warm glow from the high windows. Yes, the declaration binds the court as much as it binds us. Tradition is stronger than politics in the Veyron Empire. Marcus looked back toward the balconies where the council members still observed them, some with curiosity, others with careful restraint. Back on Earth we usually say rules only matter if people choose to follow them. Lyra allowed a small thoughtful smile. Here the oldest rules shape the future, whether people welcome them or not. A group of palace attendants quietly approached the platform, their movements respectful and measured. One of them bowed slightly before speaking. Princess Lyra, the council requests that the protector be given residence within the royal wing during the period of the bond. Marcus glanced toward Lyra, then back to the attendant. Well, that sounds official enough. Lyra acknowledged the attendant with a simple nod, and the figure stepped away to carry the message across the chamber. Marcus watched the palace staff move through the enormous hall, preparing for a future that had shifted in a single afternoon. He rested his hands on the edge of the crystal platform and looked out toward the wide windows where the distant city of Veyra glowed beneath the setting sun, towers of white and silver stretching toward a sky slowly turning shades of amber and violet. You know, princess, he said quietly, when my shuttle came down in that valley I thought the worst part of the day would be repairing the engines. Lyra followed his gaze toward the city that now waited beyond the palace walls. Instead you became part of the Empire's oldest law. Marcus chuckled softly. Life has a strange sense of humor. For a moment neither of them spoke, the enormous hall around them slowly returning to its usual rhythm while the fading sunlight painted the palace floor with long quiet shadows. Marcus finally straightened and looked toward the horizon beyond the windows, the alien city shining beneath unfamiliar stars that would soon appear in the evening sky. 1 year, he said thoughtfully, that is how long the bond lasts. Lyra nodded, her voice calm but reflective. 1 year for the Empire to stabilize and for the Protector to stand beside the heir. Marcus gave a small confident smile and folded his arms. Then I suppose we should make the most of the time, because something tells me the universe did not bring a human pilot across half the galaxy just to stand quietly in a palace. Lyra looked at him for a moment longer before turning toward the glowing city beyond the windows, and for the first time since the declaration her voice carried a quiet note of hope. Perhaps the universe brought you here to remind the Empire that the future can arrive in unexpected ways. Marcus glanced once more at